Hare Krishna. Hi Kiddus. Welcome to our Kiddus Academy. Today's topic is cardiovascular system. Before going into the topic, we'll start the session with one Omkara. Sit straight. Take a deep inhalation. When you're exhaling, chant Omkara. Inhale. Feel the vibration of Omkara throughout the body. Slowly and gently open your eyes. Why we are starting with Omkara? That is to bring the positive energy within yourself and in your environment so that your mind focus on the subject. We'll start the session. Today's topic is cardiovascular system. So before going into the topic directly, I just want to brush up your knowledge on cardiovascular system. Whatever you have studied in your school and college, those topics will be dealing as an intro today. First thing is, whenever we deal with the biology or physiology, the first thing which comes to our mind is cells. So these cells are what? Structural and functional unit of the living being or a body. And then from cells, what does we get? The cells together forms the tissue. Tissue together forms the organ. Then from organ, we'll be getting the organ system. Right? So from cells, tissue, tissues to organ, organ to organ system. And when we are dealing with the cells, there are 4 types of cells. That is, how to remember this? C, men or common men. C, men. C is what? Connective tissue cell, muscle cell, epithelial cell and nerve cell. 4 types of cells, that is CMEN, that is connective tissue cell, muscle cell, epithelial cell and nerve cell. First, coming to the connective tissue cell. Connective tissue cell forms connective tissue. Then muscle cell forms muscle tissue. Epithelial cell forms epithelial tissue. Nerve cell forms the nervous tissue. So these cells, they combine together to form a particular action that forms the tissue, that is connective tissue, muscle tissue, epithelial tissue and nervous tissue. From tissues, we'll be getting a organ. From connective tissue, you'll be getting a bone, blood. From muscle tissue, heart. From epithelial tissue, it is lungs, stomach. From nerve tissue, it is brain. And coming to the organ system, so the connective tissue is going to give blood and bone. Then from this blood, we will be getting the circulatory system, and the heart is forming the cardiovascular system, and here lungs will form the respiratory system, the stomach will form the digestive system, finally the brain is going into the nervous system. Is this clear for everyone? Whenever we deal with the physiology, we need to know these things properly, that is cells, tissues, organ system. Cells are, how to remember the cells? 4 in number, C-men, that is connective tissue cell, muscle cell, epithelial cell, nerve cell. Then from cells, the tissues are formed. What are those tissues? From connective tissue cell, it is connective tissue, muscle cell, muscle tissue, epithelial cell, epithelial tissue, then nerve cell, nervous tissue, nerve tissue. Then from there, the organ, that is connective tissue, forms bone and blood, muscle tissue forms the heart, epithelial tissue forms the lungs and stomach, nerve tissue forms the brain. When we are going into the organ system, that is blood is forming the circulatory system, heart is forming the cardiovascular system, epithelial tissue, that is lungs, is forming the respiratory system, stomach, digestive system, and brain is forming the nervous system. You might be thinking why we are dealing with this, because In cardiovascular system, when we are going into the muscle, that is a cardiac muscle, you need to know all these things. Then coming to the nervous system, how the nervous system is divided. Nervous system is divided into central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. Central nervous system, what is that? Brain and the spinal cord. Brain and spinal cord. Peripheral nervous system, always keep in your mind, peripheral nervous system, two actions, that is sensory action and motor actions are there. So motor and sensory action. Under motor you will be getting autonomous nervous system and somatic nervous system. Autonomous is what? Involuntary inaction. Somatic is what? Voluntary inaction. Autonomous, again it is divided into sympathetic and parasympathetic. So why we are dealing with the nervous system division or classification here? Because the nerve supply to the cardiac, that is the heart, or in the cardiovascular system, when you are studying about the nerve supply, you need to know it is an involuntary autonomic nervous system is going to supply it. So you need to know from which division it is coming. It is nothing but the nervous system is divided into central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Again, central nervous system is divided into brain and spinal cord. Then the peripheral, always remember peripheral, two actions, motor and sensory action, that is motor nervous system and sensory nervous system. Again, motor nervous system is divided into autonomic nervous system and somatic nervous system. Autonomic is involuntary, again it is divided into sympathetic and parasympathetic, whereas somatic is voluntary in action. This is clear? I am moving on. Now we are moving on to the cardiovascular system. Here also we are going to brush up what we have studied in schools and colleges. So whenever we say cardiovascular system, the two names comes out from it. What it is? Cardio and vascular. So what do you mean by cardio? Cardio is heart. Vascular means what? Blood vessels. So two things are going to come into the action when we are saying cardiovascular system. What are the two things? It is heart and the blood vessels. So what is heart? Heart is an organ which is going to pump the blood. Heart is an organ which is going to pump the blood into the blood vessels. Heart is an organ which is going to pump the blood into the blood vessels. Then this blood vessel, what does it do? It circulates blood throughout the body. It circulates blood throughout the body. Is this clear? Whenever you hear the name cardiovascular system, two things comes into the action, that is cardio and the vascular. Cardio is the heart, vascular is the blood vessel. Heart is the organ which is going to pump the blood into the blood vessels, and blood vessels carry or circulates the blood throughout the body. Is this clear? Now, both the thing we learned, heart and blood vessels. Then what is the function of this blood? Blood, what does it do? It transports and removes. Just you need to keep in your mind two things, that is transport and remove. Blood transports. What does it transport? It transports oxygen and the nutrients to the tissues. It transports oxygen and nutrients to the tissues. It removes carbon dioxide and waste products from the tissues. Clear? Blood, it transports oxygen and nutrients to the tissues and removes carbon dioxide and waste products from the tissues. Moving further. First we will take up the organ heart. Under this, what we are going to study? First we will study about the small intro of the organ. Then we will be studying about the chambers, 4 chambers. Then we are going to study about the valves, septae. And last one is what? walls of the heart. Okay, what are we going to study under heart? Heart, the intro, that means the position of the heart or the introduction of the heart, then 4 chambers of the heart, then valves of the heart, septae of the heart, and we are going to study the walls of the heart. So intro, what is the introduction of the heart? It is a muscular organ. Heart is what? It is a muscular organ. And where it is present? It is present in the mediastinum. Mediastinum. It is present in the mediastinum between 2 lungs. So it's a muscular organ. It is present in the mediastinum between 2 lungs. Then coming to the chambers of the heart. Chambers, how many are there? 4 chambers. So 4 chambers, what are those? Atria and ventricles. So when I say atria, it is a plural. The singular is atrium, that is right atrium and left atrium, right ventricle and left ventricle. So 4 chambers of the hearts are 2 atria and 2 ventricles. Right atrium, right ventricle and left ventricle. To understand about the chambers in detail, we will divide the heart into 2, that is right side and left side. When we are dividing it into 2, we get atrium and ventricle one side and the other atrium and ventricle the other side. So the atria and ventricle which is present on the right side, it is called as right atria and right ventricle. The atria and the ventricle which is present on the left side, it is called as left atria and left ventricle. And one more thing, whenever we say right atria or ventricle, always remember it is a deoxygenated blood which is present there. What it is? Deoxygenated blood. That means carbon dioxide is more, oxygen is less in that blood. Okay, deoxygenated. And whenever we say left atria and ventricle, it is always the oxygenated blood which is present there. Is this clear? Moving on further to the right side of the heart, we are going to explain the right side of the heart, that is right atria and ventricle. Okay. This is right atrium and this is left ventricle. So, right atrium, what did I say? Right side means it is deoxygenated blood. So, there are 2 vessels which is called as superior vena cava and inferior vena cava. Okay, 2 vessels. Superior vena cava and inferior vena cava. These 2 vessels are opening into the right atrium. See the drawing, it is opening into the right atrium. Then this superior vena cava is going to bring the deoxygenated blood, that is oxygen less blood. From where? It is going to bring the blood from head, neck and upper extremities. Clear? The superior vena cava is going to bring the blood from head, neck and upper extremities and pour it into the right atrium because it is deoxygenated blood. The blood contains only waste products and the carbon dioxide. Then what's the work of inferior vena cava? Inferior vena cava brings the blood from lower part of the body, that is the extremities, lower extremities and abdomen and your pelvic region. So lower part of the body, the deoxygenated blood from the lower part of the body, it is brought into the right atrium through inferior vena cava. These 2 are the vessels which brings the deoxygenated blood into the right atrium. Then from the right atrium, the deoxygenated blood moves into the right ventricle. So from right atrium, deoxygenated blood moves into the right ventricle. There is a valve here. How many valves? 3 valves. So it is called as tricuspid valve. the blood which is passing, deoxygenated blood which is moving from right atrium to right ventricle, it should pass through this valve that is called as 3 valves, tricuspid valve. And why this valve is present? To prevent the backflow of the blood. To prevent the backflow of the blood, there is a valve present in between right atrium and right ventricle, and it is 3 in number, so it is called as tricuspid valve. Now the deoxygenated blood has reached the right ventricle. Okay, deoxygenated blood has reached the right ventricle. From right atrium to right ventricle, it is easy flow. So the wall which is on the right atrium, it is very thin because no much work is done there. Because of the gravitation, the blood naturally flows down. So the wall of the right atrium is very thin. Then from right ventricle, the blood moves into the pulmonary artery. From right ventricle, the blood moves into the pulmonary artery and it is carried to the lungs for purification or for oxygenation. So, from the right ventricle, blood moves into the pulmonary artery, carried towards the lungs for oxygenation or for purification. Clear? And you can see the blood needs to move in opposite direction. That means upward direction. So, the action is more here. The ventricle wall, the wall of the ventricles are very thick because it needs to pump the blood opposite direction of gravity, right? And the blood enters into the pulmonary artery and goes to the lungs. So, the valve which is present here in the pulmonary artery, at the opening of the pulmonary artery, it is called as pulmonary valve. Even this is there to prevent the backflow of the blood. Is this clear? The right side of the heart and the right side of the circulation is clear. I am moving on. From the lungs, now the blood has reached the lungs for purification. There the exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen takes place. The oxygenated blood from the lungs is going to come into the left atrium. Now we are going to study about left atrium and left ventricle. So from the lungs, the oxygenated blood is going to come into the left atrium through pulmonary veins. Okay, the oxygenated blood is coming into the left atrium through pulmonary veins. And from the left atrium, the oxygenated blood comes into ventricles, left ventricles, passing the 2 valves, which is called as bicuspid valve. Two valves are present, so it is called as bicuspid valve. Passing the bicuspid valve, it enters into the left ventricle. What is entering? The oxygenated blood is entering into the left ventricle. Now from the left ventricle, the blood enters into the aorta. Aorta is a vessel which carries the oxygenated blood. So, the blood from left ventricle enters into the aorta. At the opening of the aorta, there is a valve called aortic valve to prevent the backflow of the blood. Aortic valve. From here, the oxygenated blood enters into the aorta, and from the aorta to different branches of the arteries and reaching different tissues to supply oxygen and nutrients. Is this clear? This is the circulation of blood. The 4 chambers are clear. If you have any doubt related to it, please put in the comment box so that I can clear your doubts. And here, after explaining all these things, we need to So we dealt with 4 chambers. Here one thing we need to keep in mind is what? The deoxygenated blood and the oxygenated blood, what we have explained now. Oxygenated blood is always carried by the arteries. Deoxygenated blood is always carried by the veins. But in the heart, there is a difference. That is, pulmonary artery is carrying the deoxygenated blood, whereas pulmonary veins is carrying the oxygenated blood. This you need to keep in your mind. So we completed introduction, chambers. Now moving on to the valves. Valves, as we dealt in the circulation, that is how many valves? It is a tricuspid valve which is present between right atrium and right ventricle. One. Then between left atrium and left ventricle it was bicuspid valve. Then in the at the opening of the pulmonary artery we saw pulmonary valve. At the opening of the aorta we saw aortic valve. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 valves are there. These are called as valves. They are 4 in numbers. And the name of this valve, the tricuspid valve and the bicuspid valve, is what? Atrioventricular valve, because it is present between atria and ventricle. So atrioventricular valves are 2 in number, that is tricuspid and bicuspid valve. And if they ask about this, that is semilunar valves. Semilunar means it is in half moon shaped. Semilunar valves, those are 2 in number, that is pulmonary valve and aortic valve. So 2 types of valves, atrioventricular valve and semilunar valves. Atrioventricular valves are tricuspid and bicuspid valve. Then the semilunar valves are pulmonary valve and the aortic valve. Valve is valve means it is a structure. Okay, it is a structure which is present between atria and ventricle to prevent the backflow of the blood. Then moving on to the septae. Septae means what? It is a partition. It is a partition between 2 chambers. That is, it is a partition between atrium and the ventricles. That is interatrioventricular septum. Interatrial septum. Interatrial septum. Sorry, I am going to correct it. That means the valve which is present between the atrium and the ventricle is what? Tricuspid valve, bicuspid valve, that is atrioventricular valve. And the semilunar valves are present in aortic valve and the pulmonary. Semilunar valves are aortic valve and pulmonary valve. Aortic valve at the opening of the aorta, pulmonary valve at the opening of the pulmonary artery. This valve is clear. Now moving into the septum. Septum means what? It is a partition. Partition between what? Atrium and atrium, ventricular and ventricular. That means interatrial septum and interventricular septum. It is interatrial septum and interventricular septum. That means it is going to separate the right atrium from the left atrium, right ventricle from the left ventricle. And this interatrial septum, it is made up of a fibrous tissue, whereas the interventricular septum, it is made up of a membranous and muscular tissue. The upper part is made up of membranous, and whereas the lower part is made up of muscular tissue. Clear? The septum means what? It is a partition. Partition between the atriums and the between 2 atrias and between 2 ventricles. So it is called as interatrial septum and interventricular septum. Why it is present? To separate the right atrium and the right ventricle, so that the deoxygenated blood and oxygenated blood will not get mixed up. Now moving on to the walls, that is layers of wall of the heart. We are going to study about the layers in the wall of heart. I hope till here you are clear with the introduction. Now moving on to the layers in the wall of the heart. It is divided into three, that is peri, myo and endo. Since it is related to the heart, it is called as pericardium, myocardium and endocardium. Three layers of the heart, that is pericardium, myocardium and endocardium. Then coming to the pericardium, it is a outer layer. Pericardium is the outer layer, myocardium is the middle layer and endocardium is the inner layer. Three layers: peri, myo and endo. Pericardium, myocardium and endocardium. Then coming to the pericardium. Pericardium is what? Outer layer of the heart. It is divided into two parts, that is outer and inner. Okay. So it is the outer layer of the pericardium is called as outer parietal, inner visceral. Don't get confused. Here the layers of the heart is divided into three. Now we are studying about the pericardium, which is the outer layer of the heart. That is again divided into two, called as outer parietal and inner visceral. Visceral means it is touching the organ. Visceral, viscera means the organs. So the layer which is almost touching the myocardium or the main organ, that is the main wall of the heart, that is called as inner visceral and outer parietal. Together, this outer parietal and inner visceral together called as pericardium. Clear? Again, coming to outer parietal. See, outer parietal is again divided into outer and inner. Outer fibrous layer, inner serous layer. Outer pericardium is divided into outer parietal and inner visceral. Again, outer parietal is divided into outer fibrous and inner serous layer. See here, outer fibrous, fibrous layer means what? What is the function of this fibrous layer? It prevents the heart from overstretching because it is fiber, right? So it prevents the heart from overstretching. You can remember in that way. That which prevents the heart from overstretching is fibrous fiber, outer fibrous layer, and it is present in the outer parietal layer. Outer parietal layer is present in the pericardium. Clear? Then, what is the function of inner serous layer? Serous. This is the layer which is going to produce some kind of liquid. Okay, some kind of liquid it is going to liquid or fluid, some kind of fluid it is going to secrete. Why this fluid is secreted? To prevent the friction. See, when the heart is continuously pumping, this fibrous layer, it prevents the overstretching of the heart, whereas the serous layer, it secretes some kind of fluid to prevent the friction of the heart. So these two functions are carried out by outer parietal layer of the outer pericardium. Then coming to the inner visceral layer. Inner visceral layer is what? It is lining. It is a lining of myocardium. Inner visceral layer is a lining of myocardium. Viscera, it is the organ. So this visceral layer is lining the myocardium. Clear? Now we have completed the pericardium. Outer pericardium is having two, that is outer parietal and inner visceral. Outer parietal is what? It is doing two functions, that is preventing the over expansion of the heart, that is in outer fibrous layer, and it is producing some kind of or secreting some kind of fluid to prevent the friction, that is inner serous layer. Clear? Then inner visceral layer, it just forms the lining of the myocardium. Now coming to the myocardium. Myocardium is what? Middle layer. Myocardium is the middle layer and it is the main layer, or it forms the bulk of the heart. Which is forming the bulk of heart? It is a myocardium. And what kind of cells are there? It is muscle cell, that is cardiac muscle cells. Cardiac cells are there. And myocardium is made up of cardiac muscle fibers. Then it is the bulk of the heart. It is made up of cardiac muscle fibers. It forms the bulk of the heart. Clear? It forms the bulk of the heart. And this myocardium is responsible for the pumping action of the heart, because the major part of the heart muscle is formed by myocardium, that is nothing but cardiac muscle fibers, and forms the bulk of the heart. So the major part of the pumping action is carried out by the myocardium, and the muscle fibers in this myocardium, they have grouped into three. Muscle fibers in the myocardial layer are grouped into three. The muscle fiber which is taking up the action of pumping is grouped into one. The other one is taking up the action of pacemaker. The last one is a conductive system. So the muscle fiber which forms contractile, that is pumping action, contractile unit of the heart. See, muscle fibers which form contractile unit of the heart, one set of muscle fibers. The second set is muscle fibers which form pacemaker. What is this pacemaker? It is a structure which forms the impulse for heartbeat. It produces the impulse for the heartbeat. Pacemaker is a structure which produces the impulse for heartbeat, and that structure is nothing but sinoatrial, this pacemaker or P cells which is formed, it is present in sinoatrial node. When we are studying about the conducting system, I will let you know what it is. So here you just need to understand this myocardium is divided into three types, that is three types of muscle fibers. The muscle fibers which forms the contractile function of the heart or unit of the heart, then the muscle fiber which forms the pacemaker, then the last one is muscle fiber which forms the conductive system. So three types of muscle fibers are in myocardium. Clear till here? And this pacemaker, what does it do? It produces impulse for a heartbeat. And the conductive system, the same, that impulse is carried out to the ventricles, and pacemaker directly it sends the impulse to the atrium, whereas to the ventricles to send the impulses it uses a conductive system. So a group of muscle fibers which has the pumping action, that is contractile unit of the heart, and the group of muscle fibers which forms the impulse for a heartbeat is a pacemaker. Group of muscle fiber which forms a conductive system, that is the muscle fiber which forms conductive system. So three types of muscle fiber you can see in which layer, that is the middle myocardium. Clear? If it is going beyond your head or above the head, you are getting confused, please feel free to put your doubts in the comment box. I'll answer there, or in my next session I'll clear all those doubts and then move on to the next topic. Okay, so moving into the last inner layer. Inner layer is what? Endocardium. Inner layer is a endocardium. It is a single layer and it is very shiny. Inner layer is very thin, shiny and glistening. It is very thin, smooth and glistening. Okay, thin, smooth and glistening. So once again I am going to repeat the layers of wall of the heart, that is three layers: outer pericardium, middle myocardium and inner endocardium. Inner endocardium is a single layer. It is thin, smooth and glistening. Thin, smooth and glistening. Whereas myocardium, the middle layer, it is going to form the bulk of the heart, and it is having three types of muscle fibers. It is having three types of muscle fibers, that is muscle fibers which forms the contractile unit of the heart, pumping action of the heart, muscle fiber which forms the pacemaker, and muscle fiber which acts like the conductive system. Then coming to the pericardium, it is the outer layer. It is again divided into outer parietal and inner visceral layer. Inner visceral layer, it lines the myocardium, viscera. You can remember like that, viscera is the organ, it lines the myocardium. Whereas outer parietal layer, again it is divided into two, that is outer fibrous and inner serous layer. Outer fibrous layer, what does it do? It prevents the over expansion of the heart. Then the serous layer, it is going to secrete some kind of fluid, so to prevent the friction. That's it. I hope this is clear. So under cardiovascular system, we told it is cardio and vascular, right? We just finished about cardio. Now we are moving on into vascular. Vascular means what? Blood vessels, right? So this blood vessels means two types. What are those? Arteries and veins. So that is, blood vessels are arteries and veins. So arteries are going to carry the oxygenated blood, veins are going to carry the deoxygenated blood. The exception is what? The pulmonary artery carries the deoxygenated blood, pulmonary vein carries the oxygenated blood. Clear? And how these arteries and veins are interconnected, that we need to know, because the artery is going to carry the blood towards the tissues, and from there the veins are going to carry the deoxygenated blood towards the heart, right? So see the connection here. First comes the aorta, the blood from left ventricle, that is the oxygenated blood from left ventricle enters into the aorta. From there it is moving to the artery. From aorta it is moving to the artery. From artery it is moving into arterioles. From arterioles it is moving into terminal arterioles. From terminal arterioles, what is that? The capillaries are formed. So through this capillaries, the exchange takes place. Exchange of oxygen, carbon dioxide, waste products, nutrients, everything takes place. So the terminal arterioles, which brings the oxygenated blood, comes into the capillaries, and from capillaries, the tissues or the cells, it takes up the oxygen and nutrients from the capillaries and then leaves out the carbon dioxide and waste products into the capillary. From the capillary end, the other end of the capillary is going to form what? Venule. And from venule, again it is going to form vein. From veins, coming to the vena cava. So how the circulation takes place after the aorta? It is from aorta, it is moving into the arteries, from arteries to the arterioles, arterioles to the terminal arterioles, and from there to the capillaries. From capillaries, there at the level of capillaries, the exchange takes place. From capillaries, it is moving into the venule, that is deoxygenated blood is moving into the venule. From venule, moving into the vein. From veins, it is moving into the vena cava, and from vena cava, it comes back to the right atrium. This is from left ventricle, it is starting, it is ending at right atrium. Okay, the size of aorta is what? 25 mm. This artery is 4 mm. The size of arteries are 4 mm. Aorta, the size of aorta is 25 mm. The size of artery is 4 mm. The arterioles is around 30 micro. 30 micro. The terminal, it is around 10 micro. Then coming to the venule, it is 20 micro, veins it is 5 mm, and vena cava it is 30 mm. The size of the vena cava is 30 mm, whereas aorta is 25 mm. And the artery it is 4 mm, whereas the vein it is 5 mm. Arterioles it is 30 micro, terminal arterioles is 10 micro, venules is 20 micro. Is this clear how the circulation from the aorta it is taking place? From aorta it is artery, artery to arteriole, arteriole to terminal arteriole, then to the capillaries where the exchange takes place, from there into the venule, venule to the vein, vein to the vena cava, and again the blood is deoxygenated blood is coming into the right atrium, where while studying the chambers we studied how the blood from the right atrium it is moving into the right ventricle through the three valves, that is tricuspid valve, and then from right ventricle the blood enters into the pulmonary artery and taken towards the lungs for the purification. From there through the pulmonary veins it comes into the left ventricle, from the left atrium, and from left atrium it enters into the left ventricle. From the left ventricle it moves into the aorta and then to different parts of the body. This is the circulation. So today we just dealt with the introduction of the heart, and we'll be moving on into the next topics in the next session. I hope you all have understood this. If you have any doubts, please feel free to put in the comments so that I can cover those doubts or I can clear those doubts in the next session. Thank you. Hare Krishna.